cradle.
John Langan.
And it ain't male.
John Langan from Georgetown University. I think I'll push along this same general direction in that I think besides critical questioning, there's also a need for an educational system in which acceptance of the other and of pluralism is highly valued. I mean, the Germans had a quite highly respected and influential educational system before they, in effect, destroyed parts of some of the most valuable parts of it with the expulsion of Jewish professors. But they had immense scientific prestige, and one of the problems is simply the reliance on the exportation of science and technology without confronting some of the larger religious, ethical, and political theoretical issues. It leaves you with a society that threatens to become an aggressive technocracy, and in the German case turned into be a very aggressive technocracy.
You have touched on something, I'll elaborate, because this is something that concerns me, and this is the relationship between democracy and peace and war. Because we hear of democracies. Remember, Hitler came to power under a parliamentary democracy, Weimar. He came to power by competing in elections. He was asked to become chancellor under a coalition government. And within a period of few years, he had effectively destroyed the democracy. It turned out to be very fragile. This is one caution I have had about this. And here again, in contrast to a lot of my colleagues, and what I thought, oh, if we just confronted Hitler at Munich and whatever. To my mind, one of the great innovations of the American Constitution is the idea of inalienable rights guaranteed by an independent judiciary. The Supreme Court saying there are things even the majority cannot deprive you of. And I've asked the question, what if that situation had existed in Germany? What if, after the Reichstag fire, the German parliament passed the Enabling Act, giving Hitler emergency powers, okay? What if the German legal system, the courts, had been able to say in specific cases, no, you can't put those people in concentration camps. That violates their rights. This was an American innovation. And I'm wondering, could Hitler have then progressed in transforming the society into an instrument of aggression if there had been a legal system that had pushed back like that based on the American model? It's a question, but this is something I put out.
But there were Japanese in California also.
We'll have this.
If I can press just a little
Perfection
further
is not
on
a
the point, and it seems to me that the uncertainty about the acceptance of pluralism and diversity is one of the major sources of anxiety for people looking at change in the Islamic world generally.
Can I comment on this? I mean, I think we need a little education here in the sense if you just watch the what was going on in Tahrir Square, it was a celebration of pluralism, day after day, something that the regime of Mubarak have denied the Egyptians. The Muslims pray, and then the Copts protect their backs, and the same thing with the Copts as well. The Friday when the people went to celebrate the success of the toppling of Mubarak, the Friday sermon was preceded by a Coptic mass, in which the Muslims and the Christians were party to. I read a statement by one of the youth leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood, who had been camping in Tahrir Square with other youth from other organizations, from other trends, leftists and secularists, and including women who don't cover their hair. And he was apologizing to them. He said, I just realized that I was the rude person that I was the uncovered person in my thinking of looking down at you because you don't wear the garment. I saw the person you are way beyond the hijab, where we stood together and fought for freedom for all of us. That is what's going on in the Arab world, and it involves education outside the school, on the street, for political change. And it is involving an appreciation for pluralism that allowed the Muslim Brotherhood now to sort of establish and endorse the establishment of a political party, some of whose founders are non-Muslim, are Christian Copts. And so there is, people are learning, education is happening, acceptance is happening. Now, when you take this issue region-wide and you add the dimension of peace to it, there we're invoking the Arab-Israeli conflict. That's a whole different animal. I didn't want to go in it, but it requires a look at. If Israel is to be part of this, then there are things also on the Israeli side. There has to be acceptance of the Israeli side. Which hasn't happened. Israelis deal with the Arabs through the vestiges of power, and they're there. You recognize us, then we can deal with you. Then we will accept you. That argument will never stick, because you want one side to deal with education and acceptance, and the other side to deal with power. It's a two-way street. People can compromise on power, but people cannot compromise on what they think to be historically factual. And nobody said the word Israel, but it seems to me that there is a sense that that's an issue that needs to be addressed. But it will be addressed when the Arabs own their states.
Okay, we have several more questions. So the lady in the middle, then on the right, and then back to...
Good morning. I'm from the Association of Female Lawyers of Liberia, and I happen to be the president. And I wanted to pose a question for civil society because we do advocacy for women. As you all know, Liberia has been in a long civil war, and we advocate for women and children, especially those who are in the rural areas. And we're able to manage to do the gender and sexual-based violence court. We did the juvenile court. That's our legacy in advocacy. But my question to you is, what methodology or strategy CSO can play to ensure in government that corruption is minimized and people get most of the benefits from taxes and revenue? Thank you.
That's a small question.
Corruption.
I'm writing my dissertation on that, so you have to wait a few more years. I would say two things. Depending on how independent and powerful the NGOs are, the maximum they can do is be a check on the government and be an element of the naming and shaming when it comes to corruption. And the CSOs and the media here can actually work together very closely in this process. And a lot of these societies, this applies on Iraq and applies in a lot of the African countries that I have come across in my literature reviews, in which the element of shame and honor is still huge, is still important. And if that, so one of the successes basically of the NGOs and the civil society, in which even if they fail to institutionally put pressure on the government in terms of advocacy advocacy and advice and proposing legislations and contributing to the public decision making, they've been rather successful in the naming and shaming of the officials, which is influential. No public official wants his name to be, on the front pages every other week. So that's an element. And of course, a lot of times the reaction is imprisoning these people. But once it becomes a power, then the government's officials have at least to be either more clever about their corruption schemes or address it in some way. And the most detrimental corruption, as we know, is the one that is at the top echelon. It's not the bureaucracy and the police cop who wants a ticket, or you either pay the ticket money to the police officer or you get it later. But it's actually the top echelon, what the World Bank calls state capture. Another point that I wanted to make in terms of how indigenous the issues are. So you mentioned women issues. So in the case of Iraq, and this is an example that I give, we've had a political turmoil over the phrase gender equality. A lot of the women organizations push for legislation that calls for gender equality, without people even Wikipediaing what gender equality means. A lot of people, stood against it. Because, well, they say, what does it mean? So, well, men and women are equal. And then equal, they think about it in different ways. Well, then, a man can do this, a woman... It just strikes a very sensitive nerve in the society. Not only the men, but the women as well. How about phrasing it as women's rights? That would have been okay. How about women education? That would have been right. Everyone is for it. So just the very use of a terminology created a lot of problems. When the term was changed into education and free education for women, equal opportunity for work, equal pay, which are all the components under the word gender equality, without mentioning the G word here, it passed smoothly. So there's a lesson for the domestic NGOs not to be beholden to whatever the guys in the compound with the money ask you for, because you want the grant and you want to use the right terminology, which is, you do that in cover letters in this town as well. You have to read the bio of the company before you apply. But it's also a lesson for the donor agencies. Let's open up. Let's see what our values and norms have alternatives, have equivalents in the society, and let's try to provoke those rather than wanting these people that we see for the first time to speak music to our ears. And again, this goes back to a point that I made, that a lot of this is lost in the over-bureaucratization of aid, over-bureaucratization of development programs, especially when it comes to promoting good governance, which is a solution to corruption, and these long-term effects. You cannot have a project on good governance and see the results in a year. It just doesn't happen. In the same way that education's benefits are in the long run. Therefore, commitment to programs, doing them right now, but not being very hasty about seeing the results and putting them on a pie chart in a PowerPoint slideshow, I think is the first point on the donor side. And then, of course, promoting more on the domestic NGOs to try to culturally translate what they want and what we want, and try to work together. I'll just give you a very bad example about the outsourcing part, in which I worked with an expatriate advisor who came to the town, and we went to meet with the minister regarding a specific program. And while we were sitting, he looked up. There was a big picture of a guy, and the advisor said, "Who's that?" Point is, well, I mean, it's that part of the world. Wherever you go, there's a picture of the leader. If you go to a country for tourism, you read a tourist book. So read a little bit about the country that you're going to advise.
Can I, on that question? Oh, okay. So maybe I'll...
Just one comment. I think this corruption issue and governance deserves a whole meeting in itself. But two, we've been surprised at how seldom religious leaders are in the forefront of talking about corruption, and I think there are two practical points. The first one is your own house has to be in order. And the second is you have to have a fairly clear toolkit of what to do.